I now call to order the Society's 2,463rd meeting in what is now the 151st year since its founding on March 13, 1871. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Larry Milstein. I'm the president of PSW, one of the oldest scientific societies of Washington, D.C., committed to providing a forum to further scientific understanding and inquiry. Welcome to our members, guests, and friends, including everyone here in the Powell Auditorium at the Cosmos Club, and everyone tuning in on Zoom and on YouTube to tonight's lecture by Bindu Nair. The Society is grateful to the sponsors of the 2022-2023 lecture series for their support, the Policy Studies Organization in cooperation with the American Public University, and a generous donor who's asked to remain anonymous. And I'm pleased to announce the following new members: Alan Gottfried, Professor Emeritus at Cal State Fullerton, interested in astronomy, astrophysics, psychology, and social sciences, who learned of PSW on his own. And tonight's speaker, who learned of PSW from our invitation to her to speak tonight, and whose interest will be clear in part from tonight's lecture. We welcome them to membership. If you're not a member and would like to join PSW or support the Society, you can do so through the PSW website using the blue Join button on the upper right-hand corner of the home page. We welcome new members, and we appreciate donations. If you're not a member and would like to join, all members are entitled to wear the PSW Science Rosette. The rosettes are $15 plus 90 cents DC sales tax. They can be purchased online or at the rosette table in the back of the room. Please note that the rosettes must be picked up at a lecture at the Cosmos Club here in the Powell Auditorium. Generally, PSW cannot mail them to you because the tax accounting complexities are onerous. Sales taxes are levied based on where you live. And we are not going to keep track of sales tax rules in 50 states. Special Projects Director Camille Lance will now read the minutes of the 2,463rd meeting. It's actually the 2,462nd meeting and the lecture by Ralph McNutt on the first interstellar probe. Camille, the stage is yours.
Thank you kindly, Larry. Hello, everyone. Good evening. On September 11th, 2022, in the Powell Auditorium of the Cosmos Club in Washington, D.C., and by Zoom webinar, broadcast on the PSW Science YouTube channel, President Larry Milstein called together the 2,462nd meeting of the Society to order at 8:02 p.m. He welcomed new members, and the minutes of the previous meeting were read. President Milstein then introduced the speaker for the evening, Ralph McNutt, a principal professional staff member in the space exploration sector of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. His lecture was titled, "A First Interstellar Probe, Next Step to the Stars." McNutt began by introducing his talk as a story at the cross-section of science, engineering, and dreams of the future. McNutt is a principal investigator on the Pragmatic Interstellar Probe proposal. The Interstellar Probe is a pragmatic, near-term mission concept that would enable groundbreaking science using technology that is near-launch ready right now. The speaker followed by reviewing the definition of pragmatic interstellar probe, which in part is a mission through the outer heliosphere and to the very nearby local interstellar medium. He also reviewed scientific visionaries and their contributions to the thought of interstellar travel. McNutt then described a $7 million study which APL, as tasked by NASA's Heliophysics Division, carried out over a 2-year period in 2018 and 2019. The goal of the pragmatic interstellar probe, it was determined, would be to have an operational lifetime of 50 years. McNutt continued by making the claim that any successful mission has 4 elements: a case for going, the means to go, the agreement from stakeholders to go, and the funds to go. The first interstellar probe mission considered occurred in 1960. By 1977, Voyager 1 launched, he describes, and the Pioneer missions launched thereafter. Several studies were executed to review potential interstellar missions. Primary objectives for such missions include the characterization of the heliopause, characterization of the interstellar medium, characterization of cosmic rays. However, these objectives have changed as a result of scientific understanding emerging from missions including New Horizons. New objectives, McNutt explained, include understanding the processes that shape the heliosphere. One model, the croissant model, shows interstellar magnetic field lines tracing alongside the outer heliopause. McNutt noted that Voyager has not yet detected the interstellar magnetic field direction, despite being outside of the heliosphere. The speaker then summarized 3 science questions which would be addressed by the interstellar probe. First, how is our heliosphere upheld by physical processes from the sun to the very local interstellar medium, and how do those globally manifest themselves? Second, how does the sun's activity, the interstellar medium, and its possible inhomogeneities influence the dynamics and evolution of the global heliosphere? And third, how do the current very local interstellar medium properties inform our understanding of the evolutionary path of the heliosphere? McNutt then highlighted 3 optional cross-divisional goals, including identification of extragalactic light spectrum, which is missing from the understanding of extragalactic formation. The speaker went on to discuss how science informed the concept of operations and reviewed science traceability matrix used to identify requirements in mission phases. He then went through the 3 mission concepts. McNutt summarized these 3 mission concepts as the unpowered Jupiter gravity assist, the active Jupiter gravity assist, and the Jupiter gravity assist with a maneuver through the sun. Near the sun, rather, not through the sun, as that would be ridiculous. The speaker noted that all mission concepts were ballistic with low thrust. The speaker then discussed the baseline mission characteristics, such as launch windows being in 2026, data rates occurring through X-band, and leveraging a next-generation radioisotopic thermoelectric generator. Next, the question and answer period began. One of the members asked about the main lessons from Voyager missions that will help for the interstellar probe. McNutt responded by explaining that Voyager did not account for turnover and that they instead will learn from the difficulties that posed, including, for example, the drawings from Voyager were not kept. So they, this time, will plan for a long-term success from the beginning. Another member asked the speaker to comment on the timeline of the mission. Specifically, there has been approximately a 60-year period of waiting since the idea first emerged due to a lack of adequate propulsion capabilities. McNutt likened the mission to the Wright brothers and agreed that the time now is right for sending this mission. Another member asked about the possibilities of interstellar travel and what we might do now to get further in the long run. The speaker answered simply by quoting Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy with, "Space is big." After the question and answer period, President Milstein thanked the speaker, made the usual housekeeping announcements, and invited guests to join the society. President Milstein adjourned the meeting at 9:50 p.m. The temperature in Washington, D.C. was 23 degrees Celsius. The weather was clear. And the number of streaming online viewers was 104, with views on the PSW Science YouTube and Vimeo channels in the first 2 weeks of the lecture came in at 405. Respectfully submitted, Cameo Lance, on behalf of the recording secretary.
Thank you, Cameo. Are there any comments on or corrections to or additions to the minutes? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to accept. From a member. Second from a member. All members in favor, raise your hand. All members opposed, vocalize. Hearing no objections, the minutes are accepted as read and will be posted to the website in due course. subject to any electronic comments that may come in the next 2 days. We now turn to tonight's lecture. By Bindu Nair, and her lecture on the Endless Frontier, DoD's Basic Research Initiatives. Bindu is the Director of Basic Research within the Office of the Secretary of Defense. She is responsible for $2.5 billion in annual investment in basic science, supporting high-risk, high-payoff basic research projects that probe the limits of today's technologies and aim to discover new phenomena and develop knowledge and know-how with the possibility to engender future technologies essential to the department's missions. Bindu previously served DoD in a variety of roles, including acting director and deputy director in the Human Performance Testing and Biosystems Directorate. She has been involved in overseeing a broad range of DoD science and technology programs with particular focuses on environmental technologies, bioassist technologies, including prosthetics and exoskeletons, and human-machine teaming technologies. Prior to joining the Office of the Secretary, Bindu worked for the Department of the Army with oversight responsibilities for the Science and Technology Program in Power and Energy. Bindu has carried out extensive research in materials science and engineering, including work on nanomaterials, polymers, and organic electronic materials. Her publications are primary in the membrane and materials development fields, and she holds patents on fuel cell technologies. Bindu earned a Bachelor of Science at the University of Florida and a PhD in Materials Science and Engineering at MIT. All questions will be fielded after the lecture during the Q&A session. Bindu, the stage is yours. I think this battery died, so you're going to use it.
Okay. Well, good evening, all, and thank you for taking the time to spend the evening with me and learn a little bit about DoD and DoD basic research. What I hope to do today is take you on a little journey on how DoD fits into our U.S. government fundamental research activities. Talk to you a little bit about what I think about fundamental research, how important it is for the country at large, and where we stand as a country, what we're doing, how we're doing things, give you a little bit of my perspective on that, and talk a little bit about where we can go and what we should be doing and how we should be thinking about policies. And so I hope to have a conversation with all of you in a little while, but let me walk through some of the charts I've prepared and the conversations I wanted to have. So again, I think I'll start by telling you a little bit about the background of why, when I talk to folks outside the country and they find out how much of the country's basic research, especially in the physical sciences and the mathematics, comes through the Department of Defense, it's like completely surprising to them, right? Most people have civilian science agencies that fund research. That's kind of how research works in most parts of the world. We have a different model, and I think it's based in history, and I'll walk you through a little bit of that. I'll talk to you a little bit about how I think about basic research and how the Department of Defense thinks about basic research. It can be hard to maintain. There are forces in the Pentagon, as well as on the Hill, that continually question this basic philosophy, but it has endured, and I'm proud to be the custodian of it for right now, and I hope to be able to pass it on to somebody else who will maintain this sort of proud tradition and vision within the department. I think it is important for the department. I think it is important for the country as a whole. Talk a little bit about keeping basic research independent and how critical that is, how we can foster creativity by having an independent perspective on basic research. We are having challenges right now. I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the policy work we've been thinking about in keeping basic research open. That is a challenging space. There are serious issues and questions, but I think that any time we go into a solution that is a protective crouch, we tend to come out worse off than we started. So that's my perspective, and I'll share a little bit about that. Talking a little bit about international science and the global scientific commons, where it stands today, what our responsibilities to it are, and where I believe we should go, and sort of close out with some discussions of where we might want to go. So I think you're all in this room going to be familiar with Vannevar Bush, but I think it's important for me to start with him. He was the director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development during World War II, the first presidential science advisor, and he spearheaded the creation of NSF, and of course authored Science, the Endless Frontier, which has been in many ways the blueprint that our entire US government system of science has built off of. Bush understood the vital role that basic research has had or has in supporting technological, economic, and cultural progress, national security, and health. And in his sort of seminal manuscript, Science, the Endless Frontier, he advocated for a peacetime government R&D agency for federal funding of basic research, right? So this is, in some ways, I think of Bush as the guy that set up the ecosystem that we have for fundamental research in the country today. So if we look at the post-war research model, so while Science, the Endless Frontier was published in 1945, and the NSF was not formed until 1950, in the meantime, what you'll see is, well, let's see, right here. We have the funding, we have the creation of the Office of Naval Research that was founded in 1946, which became a major funder of academic scientific research, supporting the growth of really the modern university research system in the country. Do you know who came up with the idea of grants and developed grants and grant making as a mechanism? That was ONR, right? So that is where a lot of the basis of how we think about the university and academic research system in the country started. It started at this early stage of this relationship that was building between the Office of Naval Research, and by 1953, the DoD was spending a significant amount on university research, and the Department of Defense has maintained its place as the second largest funder of academic R&D since then, right? So I think that this is something that sometimes people forget, how enormous an impact DoD has had and how enormous a budget it really has to affect how we think about fundamental research and early research or academic research in this country. So if I look at, so these are, I think, 2019 numbers. If I look at our federal academic R&D expenditures across the US government, so this donut chart shows federal R&D expenditures by agency to universities. This is specifically to the university sector. And as I mentioned, DoD is the second largest academic R&D funder. Obviously, the big dog here is HHS, which funds a lot of the medical schools and medical programs. But if you start looking beyond that, you start seeing where the rest of the agencies are coming into play. And as you can see on the right, of the entire federal budget, DoD is the largest funder in a few topical areas, which can't be surprising to you, right? Computer sciences, engineering, and math and statistics, right? So we are the primary funder. I was talking to somebody earlier today. We are the primary funder of math and statistics in the country, and we take that responsibility enormously seriously because this is the budget that builds the next generation of mathematicians and engineers and physical scientists in the country. Okay? So this chart looks at DoD, basic research within DoD. And DoD's research and development budget is about 16.8 billion. That is not all going to academia by any stretch. When we focus on the 6.1, or the basic research investment alone on the left, just like every other agency, we have a very defined budget, which hasn't really shifted significantly over the years. We, my office sort of oversees this entire, like, the policies and the strategy around this. But what you can see is that most of those funds that the department spends on 6.1, or basic research, are executed out of the Navy. The Office of Naval Research is what you might have heard of as the funding agency there, although a lot of our funding does support the inside the department work at places like the Naval Research Laboratory. Air Force, about 24% of that budget, and it goes outside in the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. So if you have colleagues that are funded by AFOSR, that's where that's coming from. Army, primarily funded extramurally through the Army Research Office, and then DARPA. It's sprinkled across DARPA, the basic research budget, although there is, perhaps a little bit more activity in the Defense Sciences Office. And then over here at the, right here, some of it stays in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, much of that in my purview. So, a large part of that $2.5 billion, I would say about 70%, 75% of it goes out to extramurally, meaning it goes out to primarily universities, although other research institutions also. So I just wanted to sort of set some context about what we're talking about. What is that space that we're talking about? And then what do we do with basic research? And again, this is one of those things that when I talk to colleagues internationally, they do not understand this. This is very hard for people to understand because they think of DoD research as building a sensor for a submarine, or building figuring out how to make soldiers' clothes different, or like they think of it as some kind of application-based research. But there is this bucket of funding in the department that is really looking towards the systematic study directed towards greater knowledge or understanding of the fundamental aspects of phenomena or observable facts. Nowhere in there is application, and part of my job is to make sure that when we put out 6.1 or basic research opportunities, we're keeping them basic. We're looking at the science, we're following the understanding, and we are not getting suckered into the application space too early, before things have developed, before things have had a chance to grow and mature and be stressed by the scientific community. So it's an important thing that we do, and I think that we are unique in the world, really, in having us be participating in this part of science, which oftentimes, as I said, is a civilian activity. And I'll try to tell you a little bit about why I think this multiplicity of approaches in our own ecosystem is really good, right? We fulfill a niche in the U.S. government's funding and creativity creation that I hope will continue, and I think will be a big loss if we lost it. All right. So, why do we fund basic research? I think that we look at use-inspired questions on fundamental processes, but also blue sky science with no application in mind. And it is through this approach to basic research that we attract the creative minds to work on grand challenges, and in doing so, we tend to create the next generation of technology. And what I'm going to do for a couple of minutes, if you will walk with me, is walk you through some of these examples, because I think it's important to understand, and they're hard stories to tell, because things aren't linear, right? And you all know this. Science is never linear. Technology that forms out of science is never linear, right? And part of why it's hard to defend this budget and to talk about this budget is because if we allow scientific curiosity and creativity to drive us, sometimes we can't see where it's going, and it becomes very hard in a bureaucracy to respect it and control it and manage it, and that is part of our challenge. All right, so one way, I mean, and there are multiple ways you can think about basic research. I'm sure many of you have read Donald Stokes' book, Pasteur's Quadrant. This is one way I like to think about it. Basically, Stokes described research based on two dimensions. The first is a quest for fundamental understanding. So how fundamental is the problem you're trying to solve? And second, how useful is it, right? Over here on the Bohr quadrant, the pure basic research quadrant, I think most of us know what that is. That's following the electron, that's following the neuron, that's just sort of following the science, following what nature is doing, and we do a lot of that. And I think most people, when they think of basic research, think about the Bohr quadrant and understanding, you know, the unknown. DoD basic research, when we think about it, we also are very, we are very deliberate in thinking about use-inspired basic research, or the Pasteur quadrant. So I think that the story there that Stokes uses in his book is, he was named after a young chemist who in the 1850s was brought on to do work for the wine industry, essentially to figure out like why some wines went sour, what was this junk that was like at the bottom of the wine barrels that was souring the wine. And that chemist, Louis Pasteur, did industry-relevant basic research. And he looked at this question, and he didn't figure out, like, well, how can I scrub the process so that I don't get this sediment, right? He tried to understand what was going on. What was the fermentation process? What was happening? Trying to give words to it, trying to describe it. And from that, I think that there is a ... to the work he later did on germ theory, because it is that quest for understanding based on a problem that sometimes the DoD does so well, because we have such a wide swath of interesting problems. And trying to give people space to look at them from a fundamental perspective can really shift beyond just the answers to the question that was being posed, but also can take it to the next level and answer questions that we haven't posed. Fundamental research from a mission-directed agency such as ours can offer that opportunity. And I do think that this is one of the strengths of our country, that we have multiple mission agencies that do this across the USG. And I think it is one of the reasons that we are as creative and scientifically powerful as we are as a nation. Basic research is not unique to DoD by any stretch of the imagination, right? Like, we have basic research being done in NIH, being done in NSF, being done at DOE, certainly being done by philanthropic organizations, all kinds of places where fundamental research is funded in this country. But I do think that the way we look at basic research in the department is a little bit unique. So rather than using a peer review process or a peer review model where basic research funding relies on the scientific community to drive research, which is most of the, rightly, most of the civilian-funded science, right? So you get a group of your 8 closest friends in a room, they read your work, and they tell you, do I like it, do I not like it, right? Like, that's basically how we do a lot of selection of science. That is not the model we use. We are a mission-driven agency, so we rely on basic research program managers, and these people are enormously important to the whole system. we get this wrong, we get the basic research program managers wrong, we've got the whole system wrong. Because what we need is people who both understand the operational space, the military space that they're working in, sort of understand the problems they want to go after, create a vision for what they'd like to get done, what they'd like to do, how they would like to grow a field, and then be given the flexibility and freedom to grow it. So, you know, when my former Undersecretary of Defense, so in the last administration, Mike Griffin, who was a former administrator of NASA actually, came into the job, he called me into his office and he said, okay, here are my 12, 11, 10, some number of priority areas, right? Scientific priority areas. And he asked me, okay, so can you tell me how you are going to align your basic research budget to my priority areas? So I went away and I came back and he said, did you do it? And I said, no. Because what I did instead was I gave him a copy of one of our programs. It's called the Multi-University Research Initiative Program, the MURI program. I gave him a list of the topics from the MURI program from 2009. And I said, this 2009 list was about 35% aligned with the OSD priorities of 2009. That same list is 60% aligned with your priorities. So when we're doing basic research right, we're ahead of what you think we should be doing. And that doesn't happen by one person sitting there and thinking about, these are my strategy areas. It comes from individuals looking for creativity, looking for the connection in the academic community and in the creative community, and figuring out how to bring that stuff home, right? That's where it comes from. It comes from the people-driven understanding of where science is going and where it could be going, and allowing individual creativity, the creativity and the drive of the program manager, coupled with his or her principal investigators, to work together to develop where they want to go together. And I really think that this is something that we bring to the table that has allowed us to come up with out-of-the-box and out-of-the-way ideas that may not have gotten funded in just what would you like to do scientifically? What would the science community like to agree upon through a bureaucracy scientifically? It's very important. It's very fragile. When we get it right, we get it spectacularly right, and we make terrible mistakes also. But that's okay. That risk is something we are willing to take because we're willing to trust our program officers. And I think that's one of the key pieces here for me. So here's some analysis, and I think this is actually this is something that we are finding is true. Here I'm showing an analysis done by my office that's set to determine which federal agency was an early funder of current leading U.S. researchers in the physical sciences. So we picked our sister agency, the National Science Foundation, as a comparison between this program manager funding model and the peer review funding model. Current leading researchers, what we did was we defined them as corresponding authors or first authors of the top cited publications in the physical sciences in 2019. So we picked 2019 because you need a couple of years to actually grow a citation field, right? And publications were limited to those published in 2019, funded by US organizations, and co-authored by US researchers. So we picked, I think the top 20 or 25 papers, and we omitted the review papers. So anything that was a review paper, we took it off. So it was really just the first, the descriptions of original research in 2019 that has been most highly cited since then. And we took that, and then we just sort of and then what we did was we looked at researchers' CVs and databases to look at the federal agency that granted their earliest career award as an assistant professor or an independent researcher to those leading researchers that we'd identified. And the fraction of researchers with early funding from each agency was normalized by that agency's budget in that particular field, in the physical sciences. And what you can see is that this program manager-driven model allows people to come forward with their craziest ideas, their ideas that they can't get through the process elsewhere, and when successful, can shift the field, right? So the fact that we are seeing in 2019 people who maybe in 2010 had gotten their first award from the Department of Defense tended to be more successful in being really highly cited in their mid-career. And I think that that's an important, it's an important finding because it suggests that having only one model of science funding is not a good thing. And the fact that our US government has this multiplicity of models is, I think, an important thing. So what does that do? Like, it allows us to identify superstars early. Here's a look into one of these researchers, so Professor Deji Akinwande, that highlights how our DoD program managers identify young researchers, fund their risky ideas, and support them through their career. So if you look at this bar chart on the top right, you can see that the DoD's initial funding in 2010, his publication citations and patents began to grow, and he received more attention from other funding sources. Department is credited in awarding Professor Akiwande his first grant as an early researcher, funding him to be a pioneer in the field of memristors and inventing what he calls the world's smallest memristor, or an atomristor. His work has opened up a new field of research in exploiting defects at the atomic scale and advancing existing applications for things like future generation high-density storage, 3D crossbar networks for neuromorphic memory computing, wearable electronics, and even COVID testing, right? This idea of this atomristor. His basic research discovery was this tiny memristor. To give you a quick refresh, a memristor is an electrical component that limits or regulates the flow of electrical current in a circuit and remembers the amount of charge that has previously flowed through it, right? So they're important because they are non-volatile, meaning they retain their memory throughout, without power. And we need smaller and smaller memristors to develop new applications in advanced computing, but for a long time, people believed that wasn't possible to make memory devices from materials that were only one atomic layer thick. And his contribution was showing that it was in fact possible, and that technology can yield a memory density about 25 terabits per square centimeters. And that is 100 times higher memory density per layer compared with commercially available flash memory devices. I bring this up to really just sort of show that, he has, that he has told us that he could not have pushed that forward because nobody else was giving him a chance, and he found a program manager that really allows him to do it, and a long-term relationship. He says, I can't do this in a 3-year grant, right? I needed sustained funding and someone to continue to believe in me over the long term in order to build something like this. And this is one of the things the DoD has done traditionally, I think, very well. As a bonus, Professor Akinwande is now helping the department identify new relevant research collaborations in 6G in sub-Saharan Africa, African countries. He'll be a keynote speaker at the inaugural African Frontiers Symposium that the National Academies is hosting with the African National Academies in Kenya later this year. So moving on, if I look at sustained funding of researchers, my office is proud to have this fellowship called the Vannevar Bush Faculty Fellowship. We not only fund researchers early in their career, but we also provide sustained funding for extraordinary researchers at later stages in their career. Through the department's most prestigious single investigator award for basic research, the Vannevar Bush Faculty Fellowships, we provide large budgets to pursue high-risk, high-reward research. It's a 5-year fellowship with up to $3 million for research, which funds researchers for a longer period of time and with more funds than typical grants. And the question we ask people is, if you wanted to change the direction of your field, what would you do? Right? And we get some incredibly and enormously exciting science and ideas out of this particular grant. I think that one of the pieces that we are super proud of is the community it forms of people who are willing to take risks scientifically, which is something that we as a department had felt was falling a little bit by the wayside. here's an example of a way that a person might wander through the department's research community. John Rogers was a 2009 Vannevar Bush Fellow. He is how long-term investments in fundamental research fuel technologies that have transformed lives. His Blue Sky idea, which was funded by the VBFF Fellowship in 2009, pioneered a new field of bioelectronics that has gone on to be really important in human health. He was in the DARPA macroelectronics program. He was looking at macroelectronics. He said, hey, I really think that what I need to do is figure out how to change the fundamental geography of the electronics that I'm building. So he developed the fundamental geography in our geometry in our fellowship that is the foundation of a class of stretchable electronic devices. And that seminal work that, in addition to being cited by more than 4,000 publications, 54 patents, blah, 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 it spun off into companies. It went outside the department. It has been used worldwide and is now coming back into the department to improve training and performance in the Air Force and been funded by the DoD's Medical Technology Enterprise Consortium and BARDA. So it's an example of how things develop. And somebody's working on a DoD project, figures out that they need to do something, comes and tries to find the fundamental research dollars to do it. It develops well outside the department. Nobody in the department's even paying attention to this except sort of watching it grow. And then eventually we get it back into the department in different ways. And this is the power of our fundamental research. It is hard to explain to people. You take an organization like the military, which is very hierarchical, and you give them a set of numbers. 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, and people then expect you to move from something that's basic research to applied research to you expect a sort of linear transition through this thing, and it is very hard to describe to people that that is not how it always works. Sometimes it works that way, but that is not how it usually works. Sometimes it goes outside the department, it goes in like sort of meandering steps around the scientific enterprise before it comes back to us in some kind of form that is of interest and use. We also grow new fields. Beyond individual researchers' success, we can impact entire scientific fields. Here's a recent example, and I have no idea whether it's going to be useful. He's going to tell me, right? Our program managers sometimes see beyond academic trends and try to grow new fields. And AFOSR, Air Force Office of Scientific Research Program Manager, Tristan Wen, is nurturing a new field of mathematics through Muri Awards and sponsoring international research. He identified the emerging field of homotopy type theory, which lies at the intersection of computer science and mathematics, as a promising area. So type theory is a formal and rigorous way to represent mathematical objects, relationships, and concepts, which allows direct implementation into software via new computer languages. So it's incredibly important for generalizable AI and its validation, and for cybersecurity. Homotopy type theory extends the theory that uses geometric and topological approaches to further add capabilities and can be used, for example, to create computer programs that validate mathematical proofs de novo, software that can validate other software, and potentially, and fascinatingly, create software that can write itself. So Tristan created a Muri topic on homotopy type theory aimed at reinventing type theory and devising computation methods for generating and validating mathematical proofs. When he started investing, the majority of leaders in the field were outside of the United States, and he was able to use the flexibility of DoD's funding mechanism to build connections between leaders in the field abroad and US researchers through international funding collaborations. So from a little-known field, the area is starting to grow and receive more recognition. Top researchers are discussing computational methods for mathematical proofs. A Czech company is using the computational model from the basic research topic for software analysis. And the Muri PI, the principal investigator of our team, received $20 million of private funding to do a proof of concept. And now DARPA is creating a new program on homotopy type theory. This is the work of DoD program managers when they do it right. They take all the tools that are available to them, they identify what they want to do, and they go out and build the community in the country and abroad that can do it, right? It is a targeted and thoughtful approach to the development of science that is perhaps unique in our ecosystem. Our funding model, I think, is key to this story. DoD program managers do not rely on academic trends, and that which allows Dr. Nguyen to grow this niche field. DoD has the flexibility to fund internationally, creating a bridge to capabilities and expertise outside of the US, and DoD program managers are empowered to spearhead multidisciplinary funding areas. So it's not all about like brand new science, you know, and creating things that are just going out into the world and not directly coming back to the department. We sustain existing ones, and sometimes we do it for decades. One example of this is ground-penetrating radar, one of the oldest landmine detection technologies, probably second only to induction sensors. GPR was first proposed as an alternative sensor to classical electromagnetic induction techniques for landmine detection in the early 1990s. Over the next several decades, a completely unconventional method for diminishing the radar cross-section of the antenna was introduced, reducing clutter among almost 2 orders of magnitude, and achieving a cleanliness of the pulse, which we had never done before. And while this is not a dual-use application, right, this is a thing that was developed based on us looking at the physics, saying we need to come up with something different. But the discoveries in pulsed magnetic field propagation and Doppler radar detection have led to really new detection physics. Dr. Michael Steer received the U.S. Army Commander's Award for Public Service for research that has helped American forces remotely counter roadside bombs, research that has saved hundreds of soldiers' lives. Steer's work, funded by the Army, has applications in electronic warfare and countering improvised IEDs, commonly referred to as roadside bombs, that have killed U.S. soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. Here's another example. Sustaining fields. You're not expected to read that. I want you to know that. But here's another example of early and sustained investment in the field of quantum computing. This timeline shows MURI topics centered around quantum computing in black, networking in orange, timing in green, and sensing in blue. These MURI topics were championed by this sort of group of program managers in the department that just were not interested in hearing about why this wasn't a good use of money, right? Like, everybody was telling them, we're not seeing the breakthrough. I mean, everybody funded quantum after Shor's algorithm came out, right? And then it sort of fell a little bit out of favor, and it became part of sort of most atomic and molecular physics kind of programs. But the DoD, we had a group of core program managers who were like, nope. We got to fund quantum. We got to build the quantum research ecosystem today, and they did it. They kept working on this, and you can see that DoD has steadily funded quantum research in a targeted way for over 20 years. In contrast, I would say other funding agencies have only, you know, in the 2010 to 2015 timeframe, really started prioritizing quantum funding. So Wolfgang Ketterle, who is a DoD-funded Nobel Prize winner, you know, has said about the department's contributions that we wouldn't be where we are in quantum information science today without some seminal DARPA programs and the long-range vision of some pioneering DoD basic research program managers that challenged us, right? So they know this, and if you are a person who's been in quantum for, like, say, more than about 5 or 6 years, you probably had funding that came through the Department of Defense. That is most likely true. And this is not just me speaking, this is in fact true. Here's some publication data that shows that DoD was a leader in quantum at a time when other agencies were not as invested. I'm showing the percentage of US funded publications funded by the largest US funders of quantum research, DoD, NSF, and DOE, in the early days of quantum computing and today. And you can see from the light blue bars that early on, DoD funded more than half of the US-funded publications in quantum computing, and later, shown in dark blue, other agencies wrapped up their investments, as did the DoD, but the proportion of DoD funding publications are around 30% of the total US-funded publications in quantum computing, which makes sense. This is still a lot, considering that our basic research budget is about a third of NSF's budget. The later investments in dark blue bars would not be possible without those early investments in light blue. I think that's the key. We built the quantum research community, and it was there, ready to grow when the time was right. We maintain relationships. Here's another example of how our early investment pays off, but in a different way. David Goldhaber Gordon at Stanford is one of the top researchers in physical science looking at topological materials. ONR awarded him his first grant as a principal investigator, and he received the P case from AFOSR. He went on to have an extremely prolific career, as you can see in the histogram showing his publications, but we have not been a major funder of his career after that early investment. But that early investment has allowed the DoD to maintain a relationship with Dr. Goldhaber Gordon, because he recognized he wouldn't have gone in the direction he did if it hadn't been for early DoD funding. And so we can call on him, and he serves on our boards, he runs workshops for us as we need, right? So I think that long-term relationship that we build doesn't have to be based only on funding. And I want to also highlight for you a guy called a specific program manager. This was just such a great story. This guy's named Harold Bright. He used to work in the Office of Naval Research. He is now retired. He identified numerous prominent researchers very early in their career, including Francis Arnold, the Nobel laureate, and David Walt, who is the scientific founder of the successful genetics company Illumina. It's estimated, and so we had this symposium, this Bright Horizons symposium when Harold retired, and a lot of his PIs that he funded when they were young investigators, that whole portfolio, it was like a little family, came back together, and they calculated on the back of a napkin how much Harold had put into the US economy. And they determined that his investment contributed $100 billion to the US economy from the companies started and discoveries made by the researchers he funded. David Walt wrote to me, and he said about Bright's program that the economic, civilian, and military benefits resulting from these investments have been extraordinary. And this is his words, right? Walt's words. The entire fabric of the scientific enterprise in life sciences was changed by the people who were in Dr. Bright's program. In addition, which goes back to this, DoD has had the attention of these PIs for their entire careers. So when you think about biotech, you don't necessarily think of the DoD as changing the fabric of life sciences, but at least according to one person, he really does believe we have. So let's talk a little bit more about the benefits of keeping basic research independent. I told you the Mike Griffin story. This is the same story associated with our FY12 priorities versus the science and technology priorities of 22. I've already basically told you about this, but in this idea of trusting individuals, trusting individual program managers, and trusting in the creativity of the principal investigators and the scientists, that is really at the heart of the DoD basic research approach. And I do think that it can be hard to maintain in a bureaucracy. It can be hard to maintain when there's so much pushback against those ideas, and people are looking for accountability, and people are looking to make sure that we're not wasting taxpayer dollars. So it is a complicated thing, right? To be able to continue to defend this budget. But we must, because it is where we fund some of the brightest ideas, certainly in the physical sciences and in the mathematics in our country. Okay, so fundamental research policy. We believe, and I hope you do too after what I've shown, that basic research funded by DoD is an essential part of that entire research ecosystem. I want to shift gears away from the impact of DoD research and talk about the importance of keeping basic research open. Part of ensuring that DoD-funded research continues to contribute to scientific progress is ensuring that it remains open without classification or restriction. To this end, the DoD has policies in place defining what we call fundamental research and protecting it from restrictive policies. National Security Decision Directive 189 was signed out by President Reagan, defined fundamental research as basic and applied research in science and engineering, the results of which are ordinarily published and shared broadly within the scientific community. It specified that no restrictions may be placed upon the conduct or reporting of fundamental research. What does that mean? I, as government, cannot tell you who to hire to do fundamental research, and I, as government, cannot tell you what you can publish in fundamental research. Keeping that is not always easy, especially given the current kind of environment that we live in, where we are worried about the leakage of ideas from open research and open science. But I remind you that this is the bedrock of how we have built open research in this country, even during the Cold War, even during some of the most sensitive fundamental research projects in the country. We have managed to maintain this type of open research infrastructure, and I hope that we will maintain fundamental research policy, again, not always known. Fundamental research policy enables us to conduct basic research in the open environment. And what that does is it allows everybody to flow through the scientific enterprise, right? It means that we're not going to restrict you based on your ethnicity or your nationality, which is a key thing. And it also encourages and pushes us to do international outreach and collaboration to ensure that the most creative minds are conducting research in areas that support DoD and US scientific priorities. So if we look at the United States on the international stage, the US has a long history of attracting the best international researchers to our university, both as students and as professors and researchers. I myself am the daughter of immigrants. My parents are both professors. This is sort of the story of our scientific enterprise. Only about 4% of people are born in the United States. So we get 4% of the world's geniuses. Maybe we punch above our weight, and we're at like 10% of the world's geniuses. But it does mean that the vast majority of the world's geniuses are born outside of our shores. What we have done since World War II is attracted those folks to come here, so that we are at much higher than that 5%, 10% that we could reasonably hope to grow domestically. This is part of our magic. It has been part of our magic, and I think that part of our ability to fund research internationally, as well as to continue to have international students in our scientific research enterprise, is a powerful one, which doesn't always. It's not a story that often gets told or thought about. Here is an example of how we engage sometimes internationally with other countries. This is something called the AUS-MURI. The Australians really liked our MURI program and wanted to partner with us on it. Working with the Australian government and in collaboration with industry, this program is funding 11 PIs in the US and Australia to perform research in situ microstructural and defect evolution from the micron scale as it's deposited in metal alloys. This Australian MURI it's one of the ways that we are using to teach other allied countries how we do basic research, how we think about basic research, and encouraging them to participate with us. The Australian Ministry of Defence has been incredibly supportive and incredibly interested in learning from us about how we do this and how we build this particular ecosystem. Combining Australian and American expertise and resources like atom probe equipment has enabled new discoveries and brought key understanding on microstructural development based on transient thermal excursions in a range of materials to better inform processes. It has also enabled the development of new techniques for microstructural analysis and in situ experimentation, including new approaches for data analysis. People who are funded by us, whether they are here or whether they are abroad, enter S&T leadership. This is part of how we contribute to the soft power of the US on the scientific stage. International researchers that are directly funded by DoD excel in their fields and support continued engagement with US government and DoD S&T even after their own funding is completed. For example, in the UK, ONR Global funded Dr. Nigel Scrutton is a leader in British synthetic biology research and a fellow of the Royal Society, and has been a huge part of building that collaboration between the US and the UK in the field of synthetic biology, partly because of the funding, and he has told us because of the funding that we provided to him. In Spain, we funded Dr. Marc Güell, a brilliant young investigator in molecular biology, and Dr. Andres Couve, who was funded by us in 2015 to 2017, went on to serve as Chile's Minister of Science and Technology, Knowledge and Innovation. By funding international researchers, we identify some of those ideas, but we also build deep inroads into that country's scientific enterprise as it grows. And that is part of what we've done, again, continually in the past, and we must continue to do it into the future. This is a role that the US has played for the better part of a century. America has been at the leading edge of science, and this has allowed American institutions to create the foundational rules of openness and collaboration through the global scientific commons. However, as US funding changes and others increase their scientific funding and abilities, the US stops being the obvious leader in research output and investment, resulting perhaps in our loss of our ability to influence the global scientific commons. It is our responsibility to ensure that the rules of the scientific commons remains fair and ethical. It's not inevitable. There are other countries out there that are we consider that are trying to shift the balance of who has the power and the authority and can lead the global scientific commons. I mean, I think that it is not inevitable that the core integrity principles that we've come to agree upon, led by the United States and her allies, these core integrity principles of openness and transparency, accountability and honesty, impartiality and objectivity, we don't meet it all. But we have put the principles out there of respect, of freedom of inquiry, of reciprocity, of merit-based competition. These ideas were born here and sent abroad, and they are not inevitable, right? We are seeing the encroachment of some of these ideals on the global stage. And who owns our global scientific commons, right? Like nobody, and that's how it should be. However, if nobody is paying attention to it, we may end up in a place where the principles that we have all learned and that we have all abided by are no longer the principles that are operating across the globe. So it is a thing that we are watching and paying attention to. Threats to DoD open research. Maintaining the open research environment is not a given, and I see several looming threats to DoD open research. First, our strategic competitors are increasing their efforts in strategic fundamental research while our own are stagnating. For anybody watching US scientific funding levels, this is likely not surprising. Second, While the US has long had no trouble, we talked about this, attracting international students and scientists to our institution, this advantage is waning, likely due to some anti-immigration rhetoric and some of our own antiquated immigration policies. Even high-skilled immigrants have difficulty remaining in the US long-term. And third, our competitors are seeking to systematically exploit the research that US performs in the open. So none of these threats should preempt our dedication to open research, but doesn't mean that there aren't actions we could and should be taking to mitigate them. So if we think about stagnating DoD strategic basic research, in 2021, DoD was the only major agency to decrease their basic research funding. We're losing our buying power and our ability to influence the direction of basic research. And this particular model I've hopefully been talking to you about this evening is a little bit in jeopardy because you know, we are not growing to keep up our place within that US government funding ecosystem. But the positive news here is that, you know, with our investments that Congress has been making recently in basic research, even though not directed to the DoD, I do think that it is, we're still in a very healthy fundamental research environment for the country writ large. Foreign talent retention is not the same thing. Throughout the entire 20th century, US academia has been a magnet for national and international researchers. On the graph on the top right, we see the change in international student university enrollment from the 2016 through 2017 academic year to the 2019-2020 year. In the US, there was a decrease of 7%, right? So 7% fewer people came to the US. In Canada, you had a 50% increase, and worldwide, a 20% increase. So this is not due just to factors that we might consider like COVID. So this is especially concerning if you consider that US competitiveness, the defense industrial base especially down here, this is actually really interesting data. If you look down here, the US industrial base especially rely on our ability to retain the world's brilliant minds that more so even than, surprised me, but it is really more so than just our general industrial base. The defense industrial base relies on foreign-born researchers. Foreign talent retention. The biggest issues in foreign talent retention require a legislative fix, and as we all know, that is going to perhaps be a little while coming to fix the immigration system. But DoD is doing what we can. We have several ongoing programs to address this, including waiver programs for some of the most burdensome requirements for specific visas. We've also asked Congress to expand the definition of special immigrant to allow the department to recommend high-skilled individuals for permanent residence outside of existing numerical caps in the immigration system. It's an issue that we care a lot about, and our Undersecretary of Defense, Heidi Shyu, has tweeted about. We are hoping that Congress takes this up. There is at least some interest in moving a little bit of this on the Hill. And then last of all, you know, you've heard a lot recently about exploitation efforts by strategic competitors. This can occur through several ways, all of which disrupt scientific norms and the scientific process. And so one of the things I am proud of is being part of the policy group at OSTP that put together the NSPM 33 implementation guidance. What we did within that context was stick to our norms, right? Disclosures and making sure that you are being transparent and honest as the way to counter exploitation efforts by strategic competitors rather than going into the defensive crouch that a risk-averse society might take. I will tell you that the initial responses to research security threats weren't very productive, and we did end up alienating some of the scientific community, especially Asian and Asian American researchers. We've course corrected, and with any policy we put in place, we keep in mind that the importance of not responding in such a way that it diminishes the efficacy of basic research or alienates international talent. The current approach is to maximize researcher transparency so that conflicts of commitment and conflicts of interest can be mitigated while protecting the structure of open research. This is an enormously complicated balancing act. Every time something hits the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal about some report about some issue, it shifts this balance and makes us go into a explaining mode again. It's a tough place to be, but it is an important thing to do to try to protect this enterprise, I believe. Some executive actions. We aren't doing this alone. There's a large interagency push through the Office of Science and Technology Policy to put in place some universal guidelines on how to address threats to the U.S. research enterprise. And they're listed here. I won't go through them, but this idea of a whole of government approach to maintaining research security, I think is very good, because what it does is it means that we're speaking with one voice. Then let me sort of end this section by talking a little bit about DoD versus academia. I see the role of the department in addressing the exploitation of open research that should be made very much hand in hand with academic and other institutions. Institutions need to have policies and programs in place to collect disclosure, ensure that researchers are knowledgeable about risks and know how to avoid threats. But on the other hand, we need to protect open research, maintaining its separation from classified work, and that is the job of the Department of Defense, which is a very complicated dance that we continue to do. But I hope I have shown you why I believe it's important for us to do that, right? It's a very difficult environment we are in, but it is critically important now more than ever that we continue to do it. I think I just want to close by reminding you of how I think about what we do in basic research in the department. I want to maintain basic research's independence in DoD. I have wonderful leadership. Michael Griffin in the last administration, Heidi Shue in this administration, both of them have been really, really, really powerfully protective of basic research and have been very open to hearing about this and helping me with this problem, on keeping basic research open, on making sure that we keep it flowing and as accessible to as much of the community as possible. We want to increase DoD's basic research programs' access to attract and maintain top talent from within our own borders and from without. And I am continually working on thinking about how to increase the funding of DoD basic research internal to the DoD and in the U.S. government generally. So, with that, maybe I can pause us and see whether there are whether there are any other questions or thoughts or things that we'd like to discuss.
There is a procedure for questions. We have, if you have a question, you're in the room, raise your hand, keep it up until somebody with a microphone comes to you and gives you the microphone. Microphone will have a color windscreen, and I will call on you by the color. That's important because people in the back of the room need to know which microphone is being used so they can turn that one on and mute the others. If you're online, I need to get over here. Let's switch places. If you're online, you can raise your hand if you're on the Zoom call. And if you're on YouTube, you can put your questions in the YouTube chat box. Okay, so we have a first question here, blue microphone. Yeah, oh yes, please stand up, tell us your name and if you're a member.
Eric Enig, a member. So I have a comment and a question. The comment is, in one of your earlier slides, you mentioned the amount of dollars that are going from the DoD to academic institutions. And I'm just wondering if maybe that number is actually a little bit larger because of all the STTR funding that small businesses get and then subcontract out. I don't know, it's like 1/3 to 1/2 of that budget, I think, has to go to academic institutions. So probably that fundamental research dollar numbers may be a little bit higher.
Yeah, I think that we pulled the data from, you know, every time we aggregate data, there are errors somewhere. This is the NSF aggregation of research that goes out to universities. I believe it includes the STTR dollars, but I cannot be sure.
Right. And then the question, so you had mentioned the sort of the origin of grant. Okay. The history of the grant. And, you know, 10 years ago, I could approach researchers at, say, Cambridge University, Cavendish Labs, and if there was someone there who was doing something interesting, I could sit down with them, write a white paper, walk it over to ONR Global in London, and they could get under funding in a matter of weeks, maybe a month, and we could have data. I could have access to data in a matter of months. And then comes along grant.gov or grants.gov, which kind of shuts down that whole process and really, you know, extends the whole process of getting funding. So I'm just wondering, what can OSD do from that standpoint? I see that as red tape. Others see it as just a process, you know, for getting grants funded.
So, I mean, I think this goes to the heart of everything we've really talking about, right? Process improves accountability, improves visibility, but it does slow things down, and it does slow down individual people's creativity. And that is one of the things that we did see with grants.gov. We made it uniform. We made it easier for people who are in country to act and to interact with government, but we made it harder for our international folks, and we haven't figured out a workaround yet.
Scott with the red microphone, and then we'll go to Carl Merrill online.
My name is Scott Matthews, and I am a member. On one of your slides, you showed an 11% decrease in investment or budget for the DoD from one fiscal year to the next fiscal year. And I think it was fairly recent. I don't know if this is FY20 to FY21 or, but something fairly recent. Can you say, why did that happen? Why did the numbers go down? Where did the money go? And can we expect that to be a trend that will continue in the future?
So the reason that happens, so that was if you compared enacted dollars, so what Congress has enacted, to what the president's budget request was the next year. So basically, what does the department ask for, and what does compared to what Congress gave us last year? One of the things that does happen to the basic research budget is it does get plussed up by Congress every year. So, so maybe it's not a fair apples to apples comparison, but the thing that does happen is other agencies do a better job of starting their discussion from Congress's enacted budget rather than the previous year's president's budget request, which is where DoD starts. And that's why you see that delta compared to other funding agencies.
And moving forward, do
I
you expect decreases?
I do not see this particular process changing in the short term.
Carl, you can turn on your mic and ask a question.
Thank you. The considerable amount of research, basic research in particular, has been funded from private philanthropists when fascism began to spread through Europe in the 1930s. The Institute for Advanced Studies was set up next to Princeton and supported by the Bambergs, but to a large extent by Rockefeller. And they brought over Einstein and other great physicists who played a major role. And that persists to this day. You have Jim Simons with the Simons Foundation, individual grants, and again, they're supporting a lot of physics. And I just wondered, how does the Department of Defense take into account this really important effort on the part of the private philanthropists and their programs, and try to integrate or help facilitate what's going on there, or are they totally independent of each other?
So I would say that that there is not a whole lot in the way of coordination, and I actually think that that's not a bad thing, because I think that what you want is, again, multiplicity of funding sources, sometimes choosing to duplicate, sometimes choosing to go in different directions, and I think all of that is good. Where I think we can and should do better is reach out to make sure that we are participating in each other's portfolio reviews and discussions and product. That, I think, is something we don't do as well as we should. But I actually don't like the idea of coordinating, because I think that that duplication, especially in small grants at the fundamental level, is actually a really good thing.
Does DoD funding do much in the way of the way astronomical observatories are funded these days, with multiple contributions from multiple parties? Do you participate with other parties in funding certain kinds of basic research you're interested in?
We suck at that. We're really bad at that. And so, that's why I say, like, that having this ecosystem where you have different agencies, different parts of philanthropy, different places that are good at different things. When we try to fund big centers or big experiments, it doesn't fall into this program manager model that works so well for us. And so we end up, being a additional funder, or, maybe a little bit of funder, but not really a sort of scientific driver. I think we do best when we do the things that we do well and keep the pieces that we, this sort of unique model of this relationship between the program manager and principal investigator that is the basis of, I think, so much success that we've had.
How does that differ from the DARPA model?
It doesn't really. I mean, it is all part of the DoD funding model. I think that DARPA is, has funded some stuff in the 6.1, funds some stuff in the 6.2, funds some stuff in the higher levels of technology. But this idea of allowing individuals to make funding or choices as to what they want to see develop in the scientific world, that's a DoD thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the DARPA model was you have a program manager, and they come in from outside.
And
they get 4 or 5 years to do something they really want to do, and then they leave. Although sometimes they stay for longer, but.
No, I know, but I think that is a difference, right? The DoD program manager, a basic research program manager, is oftentimes there for the longer term, and does learn to understand, what his or her community within the department is doing, I think, a little bit more.
How many program managers are there?
I wish. Yeah.
Roughly speaking, dozens, hundreds, thousands?
Yeah, in the sort of low hundreds.
Low hundreds. How do you keep track of them all?
I don't. That's easy.
How do you allocate money to different program managers?
Most of that, again, is done by Army, Navy, and Air Force, and DARPA. They figure out what they want to do. They allocate it down to the program managers. We just sort of make sure that the money is being spent in what we consider appropriate ways.
And what do you consider your biggest needs right now in terms of areas that maybe you're not covering as well as you'd like?
I think that applied math continues to be an area of importance to us, but perhaps not quite knowing how to ask the right questions has been a challenge. I think in areas we fund a lot of biology and health and human performance activities within DARPA, within some of our medical programs. But understanding biology as a tool for engineering, that is something that the DoD has dabbled in, but hasn't quite figured out how to get it pulled together. I think that there are great opportunities for us in that. And we are really interested in neuroscience as a opportunity to help us understand where we might want to go with AI. And those are areas that are currently perhaps not as, we don't have the program manager expertise we'd like in those areas yet.
How do you find your program managers?
So it comes in different ways, but usually we ask the services to find their program managers and usually through networking and program officers who are retiring, identifying people that they'd like to bring on. That seems to be a very common methodology.
Through the community. We have a red microphone question.
I'm Bob Hershey, I'm a member. Could you tell us a bit more about your applied math that you just cited?
Yeah, I think that there is a we have some very good program officers in applied math. We have been working a lot on problems, or thinking a lot about problems that, like boundary layers for various forms of propulsion, for hypersonics, for things like this. And so those are they're figuring out how to build new techniques to support a particular application. We have heard from the community that they want a little bit more space to be exploratory in math. And we don't quite know how to ask the questions appropriately to be able to elucidate like the best new ideas in that. Folks like I talked about Tristan Nguyen are doing a great job, but he's one guy, right? Like, and so we need to build a little bit more, I think, of the fundamental mathematics, rather than the mathematics that is needed to build a specific application.
I have a last question in the back with the black microphone. Oh, no, next to the last question. I think Lloyd has a question, if somebody can get him a microphone. But we have a black microphone in the back. Blue. Oh, I can't see from here.
So, sorry. You brought up that there are, many countries that shall remain nameless that are not committed to our, the core principles of transparency and openness. And I was just kind of hoping you could maybe go a little bit more into detail about how do we combat that and still maintain to be a leader globally on the stage without obviously sacrificing our principles, and still, lead on the scientific stage while trying to, work with countries that, are not as transparent or open as we are.
So I think that there are things. I think that one of the things that we're not doing is thinking about this strategically as a whole of government. I think we do things in like little pockets, and we engage in little pockets, but we don't have necessarily a planned engagement. And one of the things I've been really gratified to see is the National Academy stepping up to think about that and talk about that, because I think that we have a lot of sway internationally, scientifically, and we have it because, like I said, so many folks come to our shores to get educated and then go back, right, to their home countries. That kind of networks that have been formed in the formative years of a researcher's career are very powerful, and we're not doing a whole lot with that. We're also not necessarily doing a whole lot to think about strategically, where do we want to engage scientifically, and how do we want to engage, and how do we put enough momentum behind our engagement scientifically. We do a lot of science engagement with our allies. I am not saying we don't, but we need to be doing this sort of more broadly, getting out there, talking to more people, and participating in those fora that we sometimes have set up and not continue to participate in, such as standard-setting bodies, et cetera. Because having a presence internationally, whether it's from our academic community or from our government researchers or from our industrial researchers, is really important.
Okay, we have a question from the red microphone. If somebody can bring the blue microphone up to Eric, and then somebody can then bring the red microphone over to the man with his hand in the air, we'll be good. So first the red microphone from Lloyd. The microphone should be on.
It was off.
And they're going to turn the volume up for you.
Okay. Lloyd Mitchell, I'm a member. I liked what you said about not coordinating with other agencies because that might lead to innovations that they are not open to. Specifically about infectious disease, I was wondering if the DoD's working on those, specifically like, say, in this example, COVID vaccines, because I hear from, my understanding is that Dr. Fauci and NIAID is controlling all the vaccines that get made, and as you can see, we're 2.5 years into the pandemic. The virus keeps mutating. Most of the world is not able to get a vaccine because the cost and time it takes to make a new one. They're not able to keep up. And there are many other technologies that could provide vaccines in a much shorter time at a much lower cost, which would stop the virus from replicating and mutating. And I think these diseases are important for the military. So I was wondering, what is the DoD's, do you spend much money on infectious disease and prevention?
So in the basic research space, I can speak to that piece, which is that some of these platform technologies, like the mRNA platform technologies, were things that we were funding, along with other agencies. So it's not like, I'm not claiming all of it, but DARPA was funding those ideas 10 years ago or 15 years ago, so that we could have a space, so that when there was an issue, that we could jump on it. The same is certainly true for diseases that are sort of global and not necessarily in the US, because nobody else is going to do that in our government, and we need that for our population. In terms of how we're thinking about existing, partnering with or supporting NIH efforts, I'm not really familiar with that. So I really do not know the answer to vaccine development outside of the fundamental research space. I cannot speak to that, yeah. Yeah, no, I hear you.
So let's go to the blue microphone first, then we'll go to the red microphone.
Mike Unger, and I'm a non-member. A very basic but I think important question. In this town, the political world being what it is, are you a GS or are you a political appointee? So it really is important for continuity of your work that you get replaced every 4 years, or whether this is a career position.
So yeah, I'm a career SES, so I am not a political appointee, and have worked through in this role through the Trump administration and the current administration.
The red microphone, and then we'll go to the blue microphone.
Eric Enig, still a member. So Larry, you probably remember, and I know Bob Hershey, you remember, Tony Tether stood right up there, 2006, 2007, and he said that he expected 85% of the programs at DARPA to fail. That was, by definition, high risk, high payoff. 85%. DARPA, a lot of people have the impression that DARPA program managers now expect 100% of their programs to succeed. That's a tall order. So it's a different model. It's a different model now than it was.
I think that current DARPA leadership would, if Stephanie came and talked to you, I think she would agree that she still expects a reasonable, I don't know what her numbers are. I'm imagining it's still close to 85%. Will fail. I think that DARPA is interested in reasonable failure rates. I certainly am not worried about failure rates of basic research because, what does that even mean, right? Like, so.
Thank you.
So,
I was going to say, what's your metric for failure?
Yeah,
you didn't reach your goalpost, but you actually, along the way, laid the groundwork for all kinds of other great stuff, but you're still a failure.
Right. So, in basic research, I do not believe that we worry too much about that. That is actually why we started the Vannevar Bush program, because we wanted to take the stuff that the programs that were happening in the services that were going great, but the stuff that they could not fund because it was just too risky for them, we said we'll take that on, right? So we want to keep that risk appetite high.
Some blue microphone.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm also a non-member. Oh, yeah. So I have a question about your program manager model. I really appreciate that. And then I have another question, and my question stems from, so how do you, without the peer review model, how do you balance making sure that proposals or that the research that's being requested is actually feasible?
Yes.
Or actually, you know, somebody can say, like, I have this brilliant idea, and nobody knows that much science to be able to say this is going to happen.
I mean, that's a very fair question. So when I say we don't follow the peer review process, I don't mean that, I just meant that we do not run a panel to make a decision. That does not mean we do not get peer review. So if we get a proposal in and you know, you work with a program manager, they're like, you know, so usually it goes like this. You'll write to a program manager, you'll say, here are some things that I want to do. And they say, give me some more, tell me more about number 4. And then you have a little conversation, and then you create a proposal and you send it in to the program manager. At that point, they will send it out for peer review. They will have people that they will send it out to sort of say, is it aphysical, right? But what they will not do is say, you know, help me understand the risks associated with this. Help me understand, like, should I do this? That's not the question that's being asked. The question that's being asked is, you know, why can't this get done? And do you know about other people in the community that are already doing this? Those are the kind of questions. It's like purely a scientific question that is being asked in the peer review. And we do that. That is, of course, something we have to do. And it is part of our policy that you will do that for anything you fund, because, yeah, you can get snowed very easily. Yes.
So you don't put out, like, funding requests, so you don't put out, like, I guess, like, funding opportunity requests or grant requests. Instead, it's more some people coming to you and the program manager going out.
That's right. So, I mean, we do both. We have some programs that have like a defined time that you have to do it. So there's a, you know, like you have to send white papers in by such and such a time. You have to send, so that happens. However, we also have these broad area announcements that you can write to any time and have a conversation with a program officer about your ideas and what to do to sort of move that forward. And that's where all of our single investigator awards come from, that model.
So I have a question for you who asked the question. So you wanted to know about peer review, and you are contrasting a peer review situation with a committee with a program manager. So my question for you, because I think you're sort of implying like, well, how could you just let a program manager decide these things? Why do you think that a committee is going to make better decisions than an individual? If you do.
I don't think that.
Okay. Wait, could you get the microphone to her? Just give it up for a minute, and we'll get it back to you.
I don't necessarily think a committee can make a better decision than an individual, but I do think it's important for people to be checked in their thought that they might know better than anyone else. So I think it's always important to have somebody ask questions and to challenge an idea.
So what do you think about judging people by the outcome of the decisions they make instead of trying to prejudge what the outcome will be as they make decisions?
I think I need you to ask that again.
Okay. I'll let you off the spot. You can give it back to Sean there, and he'll... Sean.
Hi, I'm Sean, and I'm not a member. My question has to do, and given that you served in the last administration and you're serving in this one, if you could give any insight to the termination of the Jason advisory contract, and will it come back again?
It is back again.
It is back again.
It's an easy question.
That is an easy question. I did not know that. When did they get back again, and are they still serving in the same capacity that they were? Because the last I heard, NNSA took over their contract in 2020.
Jason's is, to my knowledge, Jason's is back with USDR&E, or we are funding the Jasons. I don't know if other people are also funding the Jasons, but we are funding the Jasons again. I think that you know, each undersecretary is entitled to make their own choices and their own decisions, and this is a decision that Ms. Hsu has made, that she wants to, you know, re-engage the Jasons, so she has.
Does everybody know what the Jasons are? Okay. You want to?
Well, that's great to hear, and yeah.
in a nutshell, it's a group of prominent scientists who are tasked with advising the government, basically, but the defense on what they need to know about in science and what kind of things are going to be important to them. And they're typically academic scientists. So, all right, are there any other questions? If not, we'll end the Q&A session. And before you go, we're going to thank Bindu for being so generous with her time. And before you go, we have a small token of appreciation, which is a copy of Volume 1 of the Bulletin of the the Philosophical Society of Washington, the original name of PSW Science, signed by me on behalf of all the members. And inside you'll find out why they founded the society, who the original members were, why they called it the Philosophical Society, which, not to give anything away, but it was natural philosophy, which was the term for science in those days. There are also some interesting articles in there about the transit of Venus and calculating the size of the solar system, and then such not particularly relevant reports on the new monetary system in Japan, which exists no longer, and how to calculate pi to 30 places. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So before we go, there are a few closing announcements. Which I'll get to in a second. The next meeting. The next meeting will be the 2,464th meeting. It will be on October 7th. And we will have two speakers, Andrew Cheng and Andrew Rifkin, both of Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. And they will be speaking on NASA's Double Asteroid Redirection Test, the DART mission. By the time of their lecture, the DART impactor will have smashed into the smaller asteroid in the binary Didymus asteroid system. And initial data will have been obtained to determine how much the impact affected the motions of the asteroids. DART is the first step in developing a planetary protection system capable of deflecting space objects likely to collide with Earth before they collide with Earth. The speakers are co-principal investigators on the project. We haven't yet determined who will be speaking at the 2,465th meeting on October 21. Hopefully that will be posted within the next week. The 2,466th meeting will be on November 4. The speaker will be Francis Halsen. Francis is the Gregory Bright and Hilldale Professor of Physics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He will be speaking on the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory in Antarctica. The 2,467th meeting will be on November 18th, and the speaker will be Tony Levy. Tony is professor and chair of electrical and computer engineering, electrophysics at USC, the University of Southern California. He will be speaking about a new technique for seeing inside anything in 3 dimensions called picographic X-ray laminography, which is actually really interesting because you can see inside a high-density integrated circuit and non-destructively determine everything that's in it. It has some profound implications for reverse engineering and national security and other things like that. So it should turn out to be a very interesting talk, and hopefully we'll learn how to pronounce the name properly. So please check the PSW website often for up-to-date information on meetings and whether lectures will be in person or via Zoom. Finally, let's thank our crew for producing this meeting, streaming and recording the program, and editing and posting the video to the PSW website and the PSW YouTube and Vimeo channels. Cameo Lance for taking care of the minutes, chat, and Rosettes. Robin Taylor in the back, who you haven't seen, but is the director and is responsible for the video, the live stream to YouTube, and the Zoom webinar that are all running at the same time, and eventually for getting the video into the hands of the editor, Bill Mitchell, so we thank for his editing, although he hasn't quite done it yet. Brett Magaram, who is back there taking care of the soundboard, and Robert Thompson and Connor Nixon, who ran our cameras, and Lloyd Mitchell, who did check-in and room management. So thank you guys, all of you. And with one last item, please return your name badges to the plastic bin in the back. And with that, I will adjourn the 2463rd meeting of the Society to the social hour. I wish everybody a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, wherever you may be. The meeting is adjourned.